Hello, you are watching the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Weekend Outlook from Friday, September the 11th through Monday, September the 14th. Okay, so we saw this frontal boundary drop down into the southeast region as we discussed in our last forecast, and it did provide a healthy prefrontal build ahead of it that got the winds up to moderate levels yesterday afternoon and actually built into the evening as an area of thunderstorming moved from the mid-states of Georgia and South Carolina towards the coastline, and it really cranked up winds. And what that did, we had a southwesterly flow ahead of this boundary yesterday, and some of this outflow from these thunderstorms went out over the ocean and circulated back into the coastline and really cranked the winds up to the upper teens and even near the 20-knot marks by the time late afternoon evening rolled around. And of course, as the thunderstorms moved overhead, winds switched directions and caused some higher downdrafting and microbursts in the area. So today what we're looking at is this boundary is going to start to fizzle out. We have high pressure down here to the south, surface high pressure in the Gulf. We also have mid-level high pressure down here east of Florida. What that does is it sort of provides a ridge all the way around in this area. Now there is some surface moisture available, especially since we had some prior rains last night. So there is a lot of ground moisture in this area of the southeast region. And so we could expect to see another round or two of thunderstorms today. Don't take your eye off of radar because those could easily pop just about anywhere ahead of this boundary. But for the most part, I think that our stronger build ahead of it is pretty much done because this is weakening, and also this Atlantic high pressure that we had out here before has weakened as well. So we're not seeing quite the sea breeze build off of a south or south-southwest flow. We're seeing more of a zonal flow. When I say zonal flow, it simply means it's lining up with the diagonal shape of the boundary. And so as we have high pressure here, it's going to sort of feed winds in this direction, especially this high down here east of Florida. It's going to provide more of a southwesterly flow or westerly flow this morning, and then slowly ease over to southwest. So we're going to be kind of fighting with a westerly element in the mix for today, and I don't think we're going to be able to get our winds up too high. I think we may stay around 11 to 15 knots tops. Now as we get into tomorrow, we have another frontal boundary dropping down to the southeast region as the jet stream is really going to be taking a dip. Actually, it's more like this, towards the southeast United States. And that's going to allow this low pressure to drop down into Georgia and South Carolina. So what happens with this is we have this dip in the jet stream that comes down. The frontal boundary really cranks down to the southeast, and we can get a build ahead of it now. Provided it's not too messy along the coast for tomorrow, we should be able to see a pretty healthy, say 14 to 18 knot build occur ahead of this boundary. It's going to be coming in pretty quick because of that dip in the jet stream, and it's going to pass through overnight. Now what happens beyond that is going to be interesting as we get into one of our our seasonal fall patterns, because this high pressure is coming in right behind it. So we have sort of a 1-2 punch. We have this frontal boundary which is slowly fizzling over the area. We have the next frontal boundary dropping in behind it by tomorrow, and this boundary should be in this area by tomorrow morning or tomorrow by midday. And then as that passes through the coast Saturday night and into Sunday morning, this high pressure is dropping down right behind it. Now the pattern of that high pressure is going to be more sort of along the lines of the jet stream, and that when it gets up here into the northeast United States, it's going to stall. And then what we're going to have is a large ridge of high pressure building over the northeast United States and wedging down into this coastal troughing, or some of this residual troughing from both of these frontal boundaries. And we're looking at probably Monday getting started with a pretty strong northeast or east-northeast flow. And I say strong, it could start out as moderate, and we could get into the mid-teens to upper teens, and then as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll probably see that build as this high pressure really cranks up along the northeast United States. So for today, we'll stay southwest. We go westerly flow in the morning and even west-northwest at some points. And then as the day goes on, we may struggle to get a southwest flow, and it may end up being more west-southwest. But I do think we'll get up to about 11 to 15 knots. And as we get into tomorrow, we have this next frontal boundary coming. We're probably looking at another sort of a south-southwest or southwesterly flow build into the 14 to 18 knot realm, provided we don't have too much coastal contamination with thunderstorming. We'll have to watch for lots of ups and downs along that ahead of this front. So, and then as this high pressure drops down behind it for Monday, we're looking at our northeast to easterly, somewhere between northeast and east build into Monday, and we're looking at probably 14 to 18 knots again, and then from this direction, and possibly even higher than that. So we'll have to really watch what happens with the high pressure behind both of these frontal boundaries as it builds into the southeast. Sunday, it looks like that high pressure will probably build in a westerly or northwesterly flow behind the boundary and sort of fade out as it's very close by. But as it swoops up into the northeast, that's what I was talking about for Monday. So I didn't want to skip out on Sunday there, but we're not looking at very much activity for Sunday. All right, so let's take a look at something I posted last night. Was ahead of those thunderstorms yesterday, I managed to catch a picture. I was just inland in between the ocean and this thunderstorm activity that was heading in from the west. So you can see the darker skies here. This is facing directly west, and you can see sort of this outflow up here to the top from these thunderstorms. Now, as I went further up, this is the next picture I took over on this side, and really neat feature there was you can see this streaking going on from the outflow of the thunderstorms, and that's representative of that upper level flow that I always talk about with sea breeze circulations when we talk about return flow. That is heading directly towards the ocean, and as it gets over the ocean, it cools and condenses and falls back down to the ocean surface and gets fed back into the sea breeze circulation, and that's why our winds went up to 19 knots, went from about 15 to 16 knots up to 19 knots. Sort of increased the circulation along the coast from this particular batch of thunderstorms. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. It's a pretty neat little feature that I caught yesterday evening. All right, looking at radar for this morning, we see a general southwesterly flow of thunderstorms offshore, a little bit of scatter this morning, nothing really going on for radar. However, if we look at the water vapor loop for the southeast region, we can see that the air is very moist. We're not finished yet with thunderstorming for today. The drier air is actually just west of the Appalachian Mountains and just entering the Appalachian Mountain area, and this is ahead of that frontal boundary, the first frontal boundary. The second one is coming in behind it. It's over a little bit just west of Indiana, and it's going to be swooping down to the southeast region. So we have lots of moist air in the southeast for today, so keep your eye out for thunderstorming activity to fire off. Now, when we talk about what's coming up with the next frontal boundary, I wanted to just barely touch on this. Now, we talk about low-level jetting ahead of frontal boundaries, and I don't want to get too technical here, but this is the ADS product, and we're going to look at tomorrow to see what we have for the 12 o'clock. Actually, this would be for the 8 o'clock a.m. forecast from ADS, and this is an aviation product that shows what low-level jetting is going to be looking like. It's a forecast for it. So at 3,000 feet, we're looking here at these wind barbs at about 20 knots, and if we look at 6,000 feet, we see about 25 knots. So we're seeing that the low-level jetting ahead of that second frontal boundary isn't quite as strong as we may think. So, I mean, even when we get into 2 o'clock p.m. in the afternoon, we're looking at 3,000 feet being 25 knots. So that means the build could come up to mid-teens, and that's kind of what we look at for low-level jetting is what are the winds going to be forced to do ahead of a frontal boundary from top to bottom. So everything sort of lines up ahead of a frontal boundary, and you get a surface mix, plus you get a little bit of a high pressure ridge off the coastline for the sea breezing activity, coupling with the frontal boundary, and that's the top winds that the forecasts are for at 3,000 feet and 6,000 feet. That's sort of how we can gauge on a higher wind or a lower wind. So we're thinking tomorrow I'm going to stick with the 14 to 18 knots just based on the low-level jetting profile that we see here. So let's go straight to the local area, and we're looking at data scope from weather flow. Right now we have a light westerly flow of about 5 knots in the harbor, 4 to 6 knots along the beaches. Those are land shadowed area as well. Folly Beach Pier, I want to take a look at the models for today, and I'm willing to bet that some of them are going to stick with a westerly flow for most of the day, or a west-southwest. So let's see what the models produce. Let those load for just a moment. Okay, so we're looking at the Canadian model, the WaveWatch 3. This brown line along the top here has the higher opinion of the winds, and that's the WaveWatch 3. It's another variation of the GFS model. So when we talk about high resolution, we have the HRR, or the HER 3 kilometer. That's the highest resolution, and you can see it only goes out so far. And then we have the NAM 5 kilometer. So I really kind of zero in on those for some of the closer opinions of the coastline. And it looks like we keep this westerly flow going through midday to even, or midday through even mid-afternoon, sort of a west-southwesterly flow, and then later on this afternoon we could see our peak values around 4 or 5 p.m. So that's what the models are basically suggesting here. Now as we get into tomorrow, we see the models are really jumping on the build for Saturday ahead of that secondary front. They're kind of going a little bit more optimistic than I would think based on the prefrontal activity and some of that moisture in the air. They could be right, but I'm going to stick with 14 to 18 knots. I don't think we'll get to 20 knots unless we have a thunderstorm line build to the west that helps the sea breezes really jack up. So we can see Sunday, we see that westerly flow enter the post-frontal westerly flow fade out, and then as we get into Monday, we start to see those numbers come back up with that northeasterly flow entering into the area. Okay, so that will do it for the local forecast, and let's take a look at the tropics. Okay, here's the Atlantic Tropical Visible Satellite. Not a whole lot going on. We have Henri, which is right over here to the northeast of Bermuda, that's heading off to the north. You can barely see it. Most of the convective activity is to the northeast and the east of the center of the storm. Elsewhere down here across the intertropical convergence, so we have a couple of waves, one here, one over the Leeward Islands. You can see a lot of upper level shear tearing those cloud tops from southwest to northeast. So that's been kind of the case in the Atlantic, or the tropical Atlantic down here along the intertropical convergence zone, is a lot of upper level shear, and that has a lot to do with the El Nino pattern of the area. Okay, so looking at the National Hurricane Center outlook, here's Henri, and he is heading to the north. Winds are barely tropical storm level at 40 miles an hour, heading to the north at 14. So he's going to be heading off into cooler waters eventually. Right now he's in barely warm waters, I would say right around 80 to 81 degrees. And I'm really surprised he's held together for this long. We're a very favorable area for development with just a tinge of cooler water. There's a couple of eddies off the Gulf Stream heading out in this direction, which has kept him tropical, but as he gets over the cooler waters, may go subtropical. Next disturbance off of African coast, we have very low percentage over the next 5 days, 30% for this area coming off. Let's take a look at Henri. And we can see all this convective activity is mainly to the northeast and the east of the storm. We do see a little bit of a feeder band from the south that continues to provide that moisture, trying to wrap around the center, but I think some of this upper level shear is keeping that western side and the southern side of this storm very dry. So not much expected, not expected to affect the United States mainland. Okay, look at the Saharan air layer and the dust at the mid-levels, and we see here's this tropical wave that the National Hurricane Center has interest in. And we can see it's ingested some of this air as it's come off the coast, some of this dust, and it's really fizzled it out. It doesn't look very impressive right now. It looks like a very, very weak area of rotation. And if we look at the earth.noschool.net map, we see Henri up here, and then the African coast, we can see this little swirl along this monsoonal trough that is representative as a new tropical wave. Now, this product actually just picked up something not too long ago, and it's particulates. And what we're looking for is the Saharan dust. So what's really neat about this product is it's actually doing the Saharan dust levels now, so we can kind of get both in one. So here's the surface rotation from that new tropical wave that has come off the coast of Africa, and we can see the heavier dusting up here to the north. And like I said, these are at the mid-levels, so these storms, when they get started as a surface rotation, as the cloud tops build, they ingest this drier air, and it dries out the cloud tops and limits them from building, so we don't get, we're not able to get any concentrated storming around the center of circulation. So it has a long battle ahead until it gets out here away from this heavier dusting. It's not going to be very healthy to start, so it may not end up being anything. We may have to look at our next tropical wave. So that's pretty much it for the tropics. And that will do it for the Chucktown wind report. Let me go back to our surface map. So once again, frontal boundary here, looking at 11 to 15 knots along the coast today on the southwest flow. We're going to be fighting with a westerly element as well, so it may be shifty from west-southwest to southwest, especially with the zonal flow ahead of the front. Now, here's the next front dropping down. We're looking at 14 to 18 knots for tomorrow along a southwest flow as well. And provided that we don't get a lot of moisture and thunderstorms over the coastline, we should see winds come up to moderate levels. And then as we get into Sunday, the high pressure coming down behind this boundary shows a northwest or west-northwest flow in the area. It may start out at low teens and then fade out to 10 knots and below as the day goes on, and the high pressure traverses the mountains and then heads to the northeast and builds up there. And as we get into Monday, we're looking at a 14 to 18 knot east-northeast build coming down the coastline. So we'll have to keep an eye on this guy right here to change our seasonal pattern and make it more of a fall-like pattern as it sets up to the northeast United States. And that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. Thanks for watching.